Hello, I'm Joan Manson of Manson Fine Art, and I thank you for joining me today as I share with you a pastel drawing of these tulips. If you enjoy my videos and want to see more, please click on the subscribe and the bell. If you like this video, please click on the thumbs up at any time. This is the painting we'll be doing, and I'll be using Jane Davenport's pastel palettes. I have two of them. I have Chilled and Birthday Suit, and they look very much like eyeshadow, but they're not, so they're not to be used on your face. I downloaded this image from Pixabay. I'll be using sponge applicators and a baton applicator and Canson Metian pastel paper. I have this in double time because I spend a lot of time building up the strokes over and over again. And I'm afraid you'll get bored and get tired watching me. Getting everything set up. I've never used these before, and I didn't wait for my third box to come, so I'm not sure that it would have had any darker colors for me that I'd need. But I started by using a charcoal pencil and drawing the image out on the black paper. Now, if you don't like drawing freehand or you don't trust yourself, you can certainly trace. You can use tracing paper, and if you're using tinted paper, you can use a contrasting color in a pastel chalk scraped on the back of the paper and then traced on with a pencil. Or you can, in this case, with a black paper, use white pastel and do the same thing. Now, it's a freehand drawing. It's a pretty simple image, and I am really not exact in my drawing. Some things are a little larger, some things are a little smaller, a little wider. I'm not concerned with that. I'm interested in the general composition, and I'm interested in it looking like tulips, but I'm not worried that the petals have the exact shape as what's in the photograph. And as you can see, the photograph is muted as well. As I mentioned before, I hope, I downloaded this image from Pixabay. And while you can join Pixabay and download the images for free, and they are copyright free for to use, I always buy the photographer a cup of coffee, which amounts to giving them a payment of $2 to $5. And I do that on PayPal. So always good to have a white charcoal pencil around. Even when you do tracing, if everything doesn't come up, you can draw in lines where you've missed things. And I'm going to use what is a turquoise tint to start with. Now, I've never used these before, as I said, and so this is a complete experiment that I'm sharing with you. The sponge applicator apparently holds a lot of the pastel, but the color itself isn't as vibrant as what I'm used to working with when I work with the pan pastels, so they don't cover the black as well. Now, I prefer to use tint as opposed to white or sand colored. I do use both of those on occasion, but I prefer using the tint and then allowing that tint to add substance to the color. So I'm going to cover all the leaves with this turquoise tint. She uses cosmetic colors like Morning Glory Pink or Sunrise Yellow. I'm making those up. That's the idea. Not the traditional art colors as you would with paints or pastels. And I'm adding a leaf to this side because I didn't feel the composition was completely in balance. So when you're working from a photograph, you can choose to leave things out or add things to it. but still, I'm very pleased with the sponge. It's a sponge applicator that I picked up online. It's a cosmetic sponge, and I bought, I think, a bag of 40 of them for a small amount of money. The only difference between these and the triangular sponge applicators from Soft Tools, which is by Pastels, is that it doesn't come to a complete point. The Soft Tool sponge does come to a complete point, but it's okay because in this one I have two fine edges at the end of the sponge and then two more at the beginning of the sponge, which is fine. They all come into play and they're very helpful, and I'm sure that I'm going to use those up over time. And to clean those sponges, all you do is put them in soap and water and let them dry. The pastel will, of course, stain them. Now I'm adding pink magenta and a tinted magenta. It looks like that. That's as close as I can come in an actual description, because I want to create shadow and contrast on the leaves. Now, they don't blend well into the color that's beneath them. That's going to take a little bit more friction and wrist action from me, I think. And when I'm using the light green, which is I guess a pea green, a light pea green, over what I put there with the magenta. And the magenta radiates out, but it's not very obvious. It's going to take a lot of work to build up these colors, but I don't want them to be just green and brown. I want them to have the vibrance of the colors of the tulips as well. As you can see that the black paper is working to create shadows for me as well, which is part of the master plan. Now there comes a point in this drawing that I had to use the black pan pastels because I couldn't draw these pastels off the paper with an eraser the way I normally would with others, and I don't have a black in this set. So I kept trying to create browns. And this is the yellow, putting it on the tips of the leaves, on the highlighted edges of the leaves. And the original reference photo is a muted one. It's not bright. It's not highly contrasted. These batons work very nicely. They work as well as the baton tools that come from Soft Tools. They're actually much more affordable, and I personally recommend them. It's what I'm using more and more of those. I do have all of the other Soft Tools because of the different shapes and because of the work that I do with the pen pastels. It helps me in changing the shape and direction of the furs and the feathers. It doesn't matter to me so much when I'm doing a landscape, but when I am working on feathers and furs, I like using those other shapes of tools. I also like using cosmetic brushes with pastels. It's sometimes a little bit more work. The sponge applies it a little more readily, but it is a nice effect, and they do look lovely when you've used the brushes. I have done some videos where I've used the brushes, at least two, I think. And now I'm using what comes close to a sienna, and still trying to build up a shadow and contrast on the leaves. And at this point on the leaves, I've applied so many layers of the pastel, I'm a little concerned that any of it is still sticking. Now, part of that is the paper. The Canson pastel paper doesn't have as much tooth as a sanded paper, so you are limited in the number of layers you can add. But the other part of the problem is that the Davenport pastels don't build up as easily, and those colors aren't as strong. They're not as vivid. I'm trying to create a shadow on the inside of the tulip petals, and I really should have left a part of the black there, but I didn't. So I'll take care of that by bringing in the pan pastel black and covering it up. Trying to create a sort of a mauve shade there, a little bit darker than the tulip. And I'm trying to use an eraser to lift that up, but it's not lifting, which is why I now have the black pan pastel. And I was never completely happy with the way the shading worked. I didn't feel that I got the feeling of a curve of the petal from the back that I should have gotten. And I didn't want to keep blending because I was afraid of over blending and that nothing in the end would stick. And I'm using this to create shadow. And it isn't laying on completely black. It's just causing the green to look a little bit gray and allowing some of that green to show through. But at least finally I'm able to build up some contrast. And with these batons, the same as the other soft tools, you just wipe it off on a paper towel to clean it up. And I'm using that magenta pink. I don't know what it's actually called, but it's close to a light magenta. And that really is much stronger than the green was. The colors that have the reds in them are much stronger, more vibrant than the colors that have the blues in them. and I'm depending on the black beneath to help bring up a sense of texture. Get a lot of nice work done with this baton. And knowing what I know from the leaves, I'm trying to be more careful, more judicious in the application of the color, using the stronger, pure colors I can from the palette, because I know that I can't continue to build up as I would on a sanded paper. Still depending on that black to create shadow and contrast. I don't normally use a pure black. I like to blend it with another color, but I'm finding that this is working for me fine. I'm just adding the Davenport pastels on top of the black to change the shade color. It just never ceases to amaze me that we can take a plain piece of paper and add some color and line and create a three-dimensional object. We can create contrast and light and the feeling of distance and perspective. that light magenta and the pale magenta that is just above it are really doing a fine job in covering on the black. So if you're going to use black and you want to use these colors, I recommend staying as much as possible with the colors that have a red base, possibly a yellow base. They give much better coverage. They're stronger. And of course, this isn't from what I gather from her website, this isn't the kind of art that she had intended this material for. They are intended to be fashion colors, and I think they're intended more for the purposes of illustration and doing contemporary makeup mock-ups. She does sell black and white drawings of faces that you would then apply cosmetic colors to. But I had to try this, and I'm not going to give them away, not at this point. I'll hold on to them, and I think from time to time I will use some of the colors with my pan pastels when I want to get something that's a little off the standard shades of color. And if I ever do another portrait, well, I'm sure I will at some point, I may try using these or some of these shades in the coloring of the face and the neck and see how that works out. I know it's hard to see it in the light under the camera, but that top left corner of the panel on the right is a pale pink. And I'm just blending them both. Essentially what I'm doing is picking them both up on that baton sponge and applying them simultaneously to the paper. Sorry, that's me popping my head in to blow away the extra dust from the paper. I don't want to touch it and smear it. And you're not supposed to blow it either because it can come back into your face, your nose. But it's my best solution. I don't keep a hair dryer at my table. And if I did, I'm afraid the force would be so strong it would blow some of the pastel off in this instance. But I can use a kneaded eraser to pick up pale spots. And I usually tape down the paper that I'm using, but since this is on a nice pad, I thought I would just try going all the way to the end, and it worked beautifully. And so I have a full 9 by 12 image. I hope you can see that I'm working in one direction to try to bring a feeling of the tiny veins within the flower. And isn't it wonderful that I was able to do this entire project using just a baton and a sponge? I didn't have to reach for multiple tools. It's so relaxing sometimes just to work with one or two tools, not worry about the size of the brush or the sponge that you're using or the shape of it, knowing that it'll do just what you need it to. And these batons actually, whether you get the soft pastel baton or the Davenport batons or cosmetic batons, they do a wonderful job. You can just dab the edges or you can streak them down. You can work them in circles. So if you are using pan pastels or the Davenport pastels or even regular pastels you can use them with, I highly recommend somebody's batons. I'm just dabbing the very edge and then drawing it up into the other petal to create that shadow. I'm not adding a lot of the black, I'm just tapping down a tiny bit at the edge to create that additional shadow and contrast. So now I have a feeling that the tulip behind is partially resting on the tulip before. We're going to put away all of our tools. I'm going to take a look at my work, see if there's anything I'd like to try, and indeed there is. This was tricky. I wasn't really able to apply my white charcoal over the pastel. It was just, there was very little tooth left, and while I was trying, it really wasn't working the way I wanted to, so I ultimately reached for a white gel pen that I just dabbed along the edges a bit so that I can highlight. And I also tried, oops. This is the gel pen that I used. I went ahead and signed it, but I went back and I added little dots of line to the edges of the tulip leaves, petals. There we go. And that managed to hold. So I always have gel pens, particularly the white, around for doing highlights and whiskers and faint light edges. So I thought it needed just a touch more to make those petals stand apart, and it worked. Here I am comparing my works. I think I did a pretty good job. The color's not quite as I would have wanted, but it came out very well, very nicely, an interesting botanical study. So thank you, and once again, if you want to see more, please click on subscribe and the bell, and a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. And look forward me to be showing you another one very shortly on pansies. This is the project I'll be doing next. I look forward to seeing you.